Hey everyone, what's up? Mirai here, and welcome to another ISBoxer video. In this one, I am going to be showing how to create or manipulate your physical monitor layout as ISBoxer sees it. Now this is probably going to be a slightly longer video because it is slightly technical. Slightly technical equals slightly longer. There's numbers, there's a little bit of math, not to freak anyone out. It's pretty easy math though. And there's not a large audience for this video, but you may fall into one of three categories, or there may be one of three reasons why you're needing this information. Now, the first reason is that sometimes your operating system incorrectly reports your monitor layout to ISBoxer, and then when you try to make your window layout, it's all jacked up and nothing's looking correct, right? The second reason is that you may have a very large desktop. What I mean by that is you may be a NVIDIA Surround or AMD Eyefinity user. And if you're not familiar with those, it's a multi-monitor layout, but the desktop, all the monitors are merged into one for one gigantic desktop. And then when you go to create a window layout, the operating system reports that, hey, you've got one gigantically wide desktop. You may not want that. And with this information, you can then tweak and design your own window layout to fit within one of the monitors or two of the monitors that you're using or something like that. And the third reason would be because you just want to screw around with window layouts and multi-monitor layouts and all kinds of setups like that. But really, this is kind of the category that I fall into. And the usefulness of it, just being able to play around with this stuff, is that when I was moving from a 1080 setup to my ultra-wide 3440 by 1440 setup, I didn't know what I was in for. I wasn't sure what type of resolutions I was going to be running when multiboxing, of course. And using the methods that I show in this video, I created a 3440 by 1440, ultra wide monitor, and then I played around with it and I saw what resolutions I would be running, and I was able to see determine some other things from there as well. And I did the same thing when I moved from the ultra wide to my very large 4K display as well. Wanted to see if I could utilize the screen space a little bit differently. So there's always, something to do with these things that I'm showing. So there are two ways to go about this. They're both the same, but they're slightly different. So it does require that I show both of these. They both have their own explanation. But I guess the first one, the easiest and quickest method here is going to be through the window layout wizard. So we can just jump into the window layout wizard, and I will constantly be making this larger so we can see what's going on. So right now I've got one single display. We're running at 2560 by 1440. This is what the operating system is reporting to ISBoxer. This is why we see this here. Now, in order to get the resolution information and all of that from your displays, and in order to add more displays, we need to go to the screen editor, where if you click on the use monitors word, you'll notice that there's a little button here that appears on the right. If we're not highlighting that, there is no button over here. So you have to click on it, and then you get the button. You can click on the button. Lo and behold, there's options in here as well. So you can see my display, and here are the bounds of the display. You can see the width, 2560 by 1440. I was not lying when I said that. This is what we're running at for this video. We also have an X and a Y. Now, the best way that I can explain this right now, and if you don't understand it, that's fine. But you will hopefully understand it as we move throughout these examples here. So the X value is going to be where the left edge of your display is at, where it's located, and the Y value is going to be where the top edge of your display is located. If that doesn't make sense right now, like I said, you'll hopefully see how this works. Now, for the primary display, your main display that we base every other display off of, so let's pretend we're going to do a three-monitor layout. So we're going to have our primary display in the middle, and then off to the right, we're going to have a display, and off to the left, we're going to have a display. That's a kind of a standard triple monitor layout that people would have in the real world. So that's what we're going to do. And the primary display being in the middle, I don't have a good reason to change the X and the Y values. I don't. So I'm going to say always leave your primary display's X and Y values at 0 and 0. You may have a unique reason for changing that, but I'm not sure why that would be. So anyway, we also have a working area section down here, and you'll notice that the height of this is 1440, but the height in the working area is only 1400. Now, before we move forward, let me just explain what that working area does. So we've got these two, perfect. So if we look at these bottom regions right here, they're touching the bottom of my display. They're all the way to the bottom, right? But if we go to the next one, there's this gap down here, and that's a 40 pixel gap. This layout right here is, if you look at the description, it says avoid the taskbar. and it's leaving that 40 pixel gap to avoid the taskbar, right? Now this number, this value, this value is going to be different depending on your setup, your operating system, perhaps your display scaling, where you even have your taskbar located, right? I mean, mine is standard, it's at the bottom. Some people have them on the right or the left at the top. Some of them are taller than others. The numbers are going to change. Mine is 40 pixels, yours may be a different number. All I'm getting at here is that just know what the difference here is. Just understand that there is a difference and know what it is and remember that number. If you're creating some pretty crazy layouts, you may need to remember that number. But for right now, for this one, we're only going to be working with horizontal displays. So we're only going to be using the X value, and we're not going to be changing the working area of any of this stuff. We're going to be copying and pasting it for the most part. So with that said, let's add a second display. Now this is going to be the display off to the right. And I'm sorry that when you look at me, I say right, it's my right, right? It's like you're looking at me. It's different, it's backwards. I tried to do a take here where I was saying left and right, but to me that just was totally throwing me off and everything was messed up. So we're just going to stick with me saying right and it looking like it's going left on yours. But just remember that we're looking at each other here. Okay, so let's just copy the name here to keep the naming convention, naming scheme the same here. So we're going to copy these values. We just straight up copy them. You can edit each value individually here, or there's just 4 values up here. They're the same things. You see, if I change this to, 1,000, it changes up here. So it doesn't matter where you change it, but if we want to change all of them at once, you can just edit it in this one single line. So now I wish this would stay. Okay, well, it's not going to stay. So I've given them the same dimensions and the same working area, right? Because they're the same. We're working just with the same size displays. We're not going to be changing up display sizes or anything like that. There's some crazy thunder outside you might hear. Power might go out. Let's hope not. So I hit OK, and where's my second display? I just added it, right? If we go back in here, you're like, well, there it is. It's still there, but it actually is there. Because I didn't move the X, remember I said the X is where the left edge is? I didn't move the X. So what I've done is I've placed display 2 behind display 1, and you can see this here. This is region 1, and this is on display 1. And these 3 regions, they should be on display 2, and they are, but they're showing as if they're laying on top of this, region 1 here. It's a little confusing, but here's how we fix that, right? We come into display 2. And here's how we need to start thinking about this left edge thing. Where is the left edge of display 2 going to be? Well, if it's to the right of my primary display, then its left edge is going to be touching the right edge of display 1. So let me repeat that. The left edge of display 2 is going to be touching the right edge of display 1. So how wide is display 1? Well, all of our displays are the same size in this particular example. They're all 2,560 pixels wide. So that means the left edge of this particular monitor, display 2, is going to start at the 2,560 mark, right? We need to actually change both this for the bounds and the working area. So now when I hit OK, there it is. We've pushed it over 2,560 pixels, and now it's sitting next to display 1 like it should. And when I go through this, you'll see that this is the layout I had before, where 3 regions are on display 2 and 1 is on display 1, but they were overlapping each other because both of our displays were on top of each other. That's no good. Nobody plays like that, right? So let's add a third display. I'm going to do this. I'm going to copy some values here. You can give them whatever name you want, but I'm just sticking with what ISBoxer gets and uses from the operating system. So I'm just going to copy these bland values again. And now we have to think about if we're putting a display to the left of our primary display, where is its left edge going to start? You got to think about this one backwards. The way we thought about the second display, we got to think about this one backwards. We have to think about if we're pushing a display to the left of our primary display, then its right edge is going to touch the left edge of the display 1. So the left edge of display 1 is at 0. Okay? So that means the left edge of display 3 is 2,560 pixels to the left of display 1. But it's a negative number because we're going left. Positive was right, negative is left. Hopefully this is making sense. If it's not, we're going to go through a separate way to do this, and I've also got a fancy visual thing in Photoshop that I'm going to show off as well, which will hopefully clear up all confusion with this, because I do understand that this may be a little weird. So did I set everything properly? It looks like I did. Yes, we're using negative values for display 3, and there we go. So from display 1, we've pushed display 3. Remember, it starts on top of it with an x and y of 0, 0. It starts right on top of display 1, but we push it to the left 2,560 pixels because that is the width of our display. In order to maybe understand this just a slight bit better, let's change the resolution. Just real quick, let's change the resolution to 1920. I can't tab down there, 1080. To 1920 by 1080, and you can see that there's this big gap here now because it's only got a width of 1920. And that additional gap, we've pushed it too far if we were using a 1920, a monitor that was 1920. Hopefully that, let's hope I didn't confuse anybody more, any more than they already were. So 1440, okay, so, and as you can see, everything is going to show correctly. The working areas all work like they should. Let me give an example of the working area and why you kind of need to change this. So let's change the working area over here. We're going to put 1,000. Whoops, 100 is kind of too small. And then let's put, I don't know, 700 or something. These are just arbitrary values. So you can see right here, this has got a working area of 1,400, right? Because it leaves that 40 pixel gap. Display 2, I set to a working area of 1,000. Therefore, it leaves a 440 pixel gap between the bottom of the region and the bottom of the actual display. And here I said it's a 700, right? So that leaves us a 740 pixel gap between the bottom of the region and the bottom of the display. So that's what the working region does, right? And if I look through some of these, they're going to look kind of weird, but it's because I've set the working region to be smaller than the actual display size itself. So that's why you see kind of weird positioning and placement of these regions. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing like maybe a surround or an infinity, when you're trying to change the working area of your very large desktop layout. So there's that to keep in mind. So let's just hit OK. We're just going to hit next. We're going to finalize this, and we can see it here, and everything looks just like we had it. But let's say that you don't like this, or you want to create another layout that involves 3 monitors or something like that. So we'll go back into the window layout wizard, and we've lost all of the information that we put in. We're back to that single 2560 by 1440 display that Windows is reporting to ISBoxer. So using the window layout wizard to edit this information is temporary. It's only temporary. It's only going to work for that one time that you run through the wizard, right? Now there's a more permanent way to do this, because ISBoxer first checks to see if there is a computer assigned to the character set in ISBoxer before asking the operating system for the details of the layout. So that's what we're going to do. There's a computer subsection here. We're actually going to create, we're going to delete this window layout because it might be confusing by leaving it there. So there's this computer subsection here, and normally people don't have anything here, right? Because you're just using a single computer and that's it. There's no reason to have multiple computers. But if you're trying to screw around with like a specific layout, or you need to use a specific layout, then create a computer. I'll just call it whatever. And you'll see that it pulls the information from the OS immediately. It tells me I have one display, and it tells me what the bounds in the working area are. Now, if you remember, in the window layout wizard, we had an X and a Y of 0, and then we had a width of 2560 and a height of 1440. Those were the 4 values that were under the bounds area, right? So looking at this, these aren't labeled with anything, so you might just assume that this is the X, this is the Y, this is the width, and this is the height, right? I mean, it makes sense to assume that, right? So let's go ahead and recreate our, hold on here. We need to recreate our layout that we had before. I'll just, whoops, that's not. Okay. We'll come in here. So the X of the second display being to the right was 2560 to the right, right? That was the X value. I'm doing this assuming, that people are going to think this is the X and the Y. It's actually wrong. That's a spoiler alert, but I'm going to show you why it's wrong. So the width was 2560 and the height was 1440. And of course we matched the working area, 2560 and 1400 for the working area. That's a 40 pixel offset. So then this one, the third display, being to the left of the primary display, was negative 2560 with 2560 and 1440, right? So I'm using the same values that I just used in the wizard. And I'm going to show you why this is wrong. It's actually 1400. Let me check these. Okay, everything looks good. Fantastic. So what we need to do, highlight your character set and then click, hold, and drag the computer down to your character set. And you'll see that it gets assigned down here. If that's not assigned, then ISBoxer is once again just going to use the operating system's information for your layout. So if we go in here, we go to Window Layout Wizard. This is all kinds of jacked up here. So we've got display 1, which is correct. Display 2 should be off to the right, but there is nothing off to the right. And display 3 looks like it's twice as wide as it should be. This is display here, but it keeps going, right? Because this is the center point. The lettering, the label is centered. So if we look at the use monitor, if we look at the screen editor here, we can see what the actual values are. So this one's correct, right? We had 00, 2560, and 1440. If we look at display 2, we've got 2560 and a width of 0. That's not right, right? We put in a width of 2560. I'll show you where we went wrong. And the same thing with display 3, now has a width of 5120, which is twice 2560, right? 2560 plus 2560 is 5120, which is what we're seeing here. We're seeing this as a double wide display. So this is all kinds of jacked up, and I'll show you where we went wrong. These values are different. These 4 values here, this isn't the X, this isn't the Y, this isn't the width, and this isn't the height. It is technically, but what these are, when you're editing displays in your computer section here, this is where the left border is, or the left edge. This is where the top edge is, this is where the right edge is, and this is where the bottom edge is. And the same goes for the working area below. So, you see this is a little different. If we look at the second display, the left edge is going to be at 2560. We're pushing it to the right, 2,560 pixels. So the left edge of display 2 is going to be touching the right edge of display 1 at 2,500 at the 2,560 pixel point. The top edge is 0 because we're only working with horizontal stuff. We're not touching the top edges at this point. But if we look at this, we look at the left edge starts at 2560 and the right edge also starts at 2560 because this is left edge, top edge, right edge, bottom edge in this portion of setting up displays. So that's why we have a width. Remember we had a width of 0 on our second display because the left edge is at 2560 and the right edge is at 2560. That's not right, right? So if the left edge starts at 2560 and it's 2,560 pixels wide, that means the right edge is going to be at 5120. Yeah. The bottom edge is correct and the working area is correct, but we also need to adjust this down here. Sorry, I meant the working area for the horizontal, for the bottom edge. So display 3, we do the same thing with our math here, right? So if the left edge starts at 2,560 negative and goes to 2,560 positive, well, that's the width of 5120 that we were seeing in the layout, in the wizard. That's why we saw that width of 5120. I'm so sorry, I keep screwing these numbers up. Right, because from negative 2560, it goes to 0, which is 2,560 pixels, and then it goes an additional 2,560 pixels, which is giving us the 5120 total width. It's not what we want. We want the right edge of this display to be at 0, because it's touching the left edge of this display, which is at 0. So negative 2560 to 0 is 2,560 pixels wide. I hope you guys are still with me. I hope you have not shut this off yet. Be like, this is bullshit. So anyway, this is set up correctly now. And if we go back into the wizard, we'll see that here's our 3-monitor layout like we should have it, right? This is what we wanted before, and of course, if we go through this, everything's going to show up correctly on each monitor, right? Now, if you still don't understand what I'm doing here, if I'm moving too fast, or there's numbers, or I'm hopefully not saying anything correctly, I do have this fancy grid that will hopefully help people. And you can draw this out yourself too if you're confused about this, right? So display 1, if we look at display 1, nope, can't do that. Okay, let me turn this down. Display 1, if we're looking at this here, what? Just go against the left edge, please. Why do you want to fight me? So if we look at this, we have this is display 1. The left edge here is 0, and the top edge here is 0. So if we look at display 1, here's the 0 point, and here's the 0 point. So this is where the left edge and the top edge of this display are. The right edge is at 2560, which is where the right edge is here, and the bottom edge is at 1440, which is where the bottom edge is here, right? So if we look at display 2, I can turn on display 2 in here. I'm not a professional Photoshop person by any means. I can drag this around wherever I want. And I can put this here, right? So I want display 2 to be to the right of display 1. If we look at these values here, we've got the top edge at 0, still at 0. We're still just working with horizontal. Nothing's going vertical yet. We have the left edge at 2560. Correct. The left edge of display 2 starts at 2560. The right edge is at 5120. See? And the bottom edge is, of course, at 1440. Is this making a little bit more sense now? We'll turn on display 3 as well. We'll move it to the left. So now we've got display 3 to the left. And if I scoot this over a little bit more, look at display 3. We've got top and bottom are not changing, right? So 0 and 1440. But the left edge is at negative 2560. And the right edge is at 0. Hopefully this now makes a little bit more sense seeing this visual layout like this. I understand just looking at numbers and just following me along, following along with me isn't necessarily going to give you the full idea what's going on. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to add a 4th display, and we're going to put it above. We're going to put it above display 1. Is that centered? It's centered. Doesn't really matter. So we're going to do a new screen. Is this still on the clipboard? It is. Okay. Display 4. So looking at this now and defining these borders, the left edge of display 4 is at 0. Fine, we'll leave it at 0. The top edge of display 4 is at negative 1440. So up and left is negative, down and right is positive. So the top edge is at negative 1440. The right edge is at 2560. Okay. And the bottom edge is at 0. And we'll copy these values for this. And this is where a little bit of remembering what your working area is, the offset in pixels, right? So mine is 40. Mine is a 40 offset in pixels. So since we're going up is negative, we're going up 40 pixels to create that little bit of gap for what would be the taskbar along the bottom here. So we do a negative 40. Again, your value may be 35, it may be 45, it may be 50. You may have your taskbar on the side. If your taskbar is on the side and it's 40 pixels wide, if your taskbar is on the side and it's 40 pixels wide, 2520 then would be your working area, right? Hopefully you guys are following that. I know it's a lot of numbers, and I know it's a lot of uninteresting stuff here, but with these four displays now, we can go into the window layout wizard, and we can see we've got our 4th display above, just like we've set it up in this here. Let me zoom out. This doesn't really work out too well, does it? Such clutter. So there we go. There's our 4 display layout, just like we designed in Photoshop. When we moved that fourth display, the fourth display is in the same place. So hopefully you guys stuck with me through this one. I know it's kind of long, probably about 20 minutes now, but that's it. That's it. Again, if you've got, if the OS is reporting incorrectly, or you've got a crazy wide monitor layout, maybe 3 to 6 monitors using surround, I think is maximum of 3 right now. iFinity does maximum of a lot, more than 3 if you have that type of setup. But this is how you can work with that. And if you just want to create, if you're thinking about upgrading to a 4 monitor layout like this with a 2560 by 1440 displays, you can create this layout and then play with it and see where you might want to position your regions, right? So this is helpful. This is only a 3 character set, so, or a 3 slot character set, so it's not really all that great, but you can see. So that's it. That's all I've got. This is creating a monitor layout as ISBoxer sees it. Thank you for watching. Mirai out.